Models mentor. Hi, this is AZ. Welcome to lesson number 6. Today's topic models. Models are very important, and by model I mean role models, not the models you see on magazines. That's a different meaning. A role model is character like a hero. It's someone that has success, the same kind of success that you want. So, for example, if you are a basketball player, you want to be great, then maybe Shaquille O'Neal or Michael Jordan is the role model. Maybe both. It's important to have role models. Role models are role models are people who have done already what you want to do. Why is that important? Well, it's important because you can learn from them. You can learn much faster. You be fighter. If you discover what they did to succeed, this is the first try for succeed. You don't have to make all the same mistakes. You can copy them in a way and learn much more faster. So, for example, when I started my own business in the beginning, I knew nothing zero. I had no idea what to do. I was just an English teacher. Now I had two choices. I could have just tried something else, keep trying things, making mistakes, failing, try again. And I did do that somewhat, but I wanted to succeed faster. That could be a very slow method if you only implement this. If I only try and failed, and try to try everything by myself, so of course I wanted to succeed faster. So what did I do? I went and I found role models. I found other people who were already successful business people. I read their books, I went to their seminars and their workshops. I learned everything possible from them. And then I used what I learned with my own business, and in this way, I was able to succeed much more faster. I could take all the great strategies that they were using, that they discovered in their life, maybe with many years. I could take all those great strategies and I could use them in months or in weeks. Well, you can do the same thing with your English learning, with anything. You can find role models, people who are taught to master, and you can steal their ideas. You can steal the best ideas, the best strategies, the best methods that they have used, and you can copy those so that you will learn much more faster. You will make fewer mistakes, so that's why the role models are so important. They speed up the learning process, they put it start. They also, of course, give you an emotional boost because you can see, hey, they did this. Somebody already did what I want to do. It proves it's not impossible. It can be done. And I also had that a little bit with my business. I was a little bit scared. I was an English teacher. I didn't know much about business, but the more I read about all the other people who started like me, with no knowledge of business, with no money, but they did certain things, and those certain reasons led to success. Those certain strategies led to success, and I realized if I used the same strategies, I will get the same result, the same success. It's the same with English learning. If you follow the strategies of people who are master, you also will become a master. Quite simple. So let's talk about this a little bit. In fact, this is how I developed my teaching system. As a beginning teacher of English, I knew nothing, zero. I went to Korea and I got a job teaching small children, and I didn't know anything about English teaching. I had a degree in social work. I had studied social work in school, and certainly I needed to teach small children. And I did what most English teachers do. I just grabbed some tables and followed the tables. And I followed what my boss told me to do. And the results were not so good. And I did this for a few years, and later I trained to teaching adults. And the same thing, I just used some tables. On this table, the school would give you some books to do, and I just kind of randomly use different activities from these books, and the results were quite poor. But I began to notice something. I began to notice that a few students in my classes were learning much faster than everybody else. They were doing much better than everybody else, so I was curious. I wanted to be a better teacher, and I thought I needed to learn what are the guys doing differently. Why are they different than the other students? So I talked to them, I interviewed them, I constantly asked questions. I was very focused on my best students. What were they doing? And I focused on the other students. What were they doing? What was the difference? And over time, I began to realize there were patterns. The best students were always doing similar things, and they were different than what most students were doing. Later, a few years later, I got a master's degree in teaching English as a foreign language. And during my studies during my master degree program, I began to look for other models. This time, I looked for researchers, for scientists who were studying English learning in general, learning language learning. And I wanted to find out again what was the result, the scientific results that thought which methods were practiced, which methods were best for learning English for teaching English. My focus, of course, was teaching. And again, I began to find patterns, and the very interesting thing to me, the patterns were the same as what was happening with my best student. So the research was showing the same thing that my students were showing. They were doing exactly the same thing. So from these two models, these academic role models, these scientists, and then my actual students, my best students, also role models. I learned a totally new word to teach English, and that is what you have now, the Effler English system, the Effler English approach. So let me talk about of these examples, and then I will talk in more detail about the importance of finding role models and finding a peer group. So peer means it's a person who's equal to you, but a peer really means is a people you have contact with every day. Your co-workers, your friends, business partners, all of those people are your peers. So people you have contact with constantly, every day. The people you see again and again and again every day, they are your peers. And it's important to have a very good peer group. You need to have a good peer group, and you need to have good role models. So first, let's talk about role models. I just want to talk about a few stories, a few of my best students that I've had over the years. So one of my best students, her name was Denise. He was Korean and he was a student of mine in San Francisco. She was Korean and she was a student of mine in San Francisco, and she learned so much faster than my other students. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it, so I began to ask Janice questions all the time about what she was doing. How did she study English? And I asked my other students the same questions, and I found out number one, Janice was focused on listening. Janet did a lot of listening after school. She had an iPod and she was listening to my lessons all the time. She was listening to podcasts, she was listening to television, very focused on listening and auditory matters, learning with her ears. Another thing Janice liked to do was read English, but not textbooks. She reads novels. Now, in the beginning, she was reading children's novels, very easy novels, but they were storybooks, not textbooks. And she reads a lot of these every day. She just reads for fun in English. So she was reading a lot of storybooks and she was listening a lot. Another key thing that Janice focused on was meaning and interest. In other words, she always took English materials that were interesting to her, that has meaning for her. Textbooks usually don't have much personal meaning. So she told a story. Oh, this story is very interesting. I want to read this book. She was focused on the meaning. She was focused on story. She was not focused on grammar points and or vocabulary. And the same in her listening. She chose listening that were interesting and fun and meaningful to her. So that's interesting. Well, later I talked to a guy named Steve Carlton. Steve Carlton is a linguist. He speaks 12 languages now. He keeps adding languages, so I forgot how many he speaks. But the last time I talked to him, he was speaking 12 languages. Not bad. He's a Canadian, a native English speaker, but he speaks French. He speaks Japanese, Chinese, and Mandarin. He's learning Russian now. He's learning Korean. He's an amazing guy, and of course, I was very curious about Steve, another great language learning role models. And I asked Steve about his methods. How do you do it? And he writes a lot about his methods on his website in his blog. So Steve gets quite same as Janice. Number one, he has a listening approach. He focuses mostly on listening. Probably 80% of his time he spends listening. He learns with his ears. Another thing Steve does, he reads for pleasure. He reads storybooks, he reads articles, he reads magazines. His reading is always for pleasure, is always focused on something that interesting to him or meaningful to him. He does not read textbooks, he does not focus on grammar. This is another interesting thing. Steve does not study grammar, he Marlon a little grammar sometimes, but in general, he focuses on listening and reading for fun, reading for interest. Just like Jenny's interesting, well, I began to see the pattern again and again and again. The superstar learners, the superstar students have this same exact pattern. Their grades are role models and they are doing the same things. They seem to always be focused on listening, listening, listening. They learn to read for pleasure. They focus their listening and their reading on interesting contents, meaningful content, articles, stories, novels, newspapers. Another interesting thing they never focus on grammar. They may learn a little bit of grammar or not. Some of them will study grammar a little bit. Some never study grammar, but they all focus totally on listening to interesting content, reading interesting content. Input is their focus. Another interesting thing that you find with these superstar students, these superstar learners, is that they do a lot of deep learning. In other words, a lot of repetition. My favorite example of this is Jerry's story. A man named Jerry died. Now Jerry was a native. Jerry is a native Chinese speaker and he moved to Canada. And he wanted to have perfect pronunciation. He wanted to sound like a North American. So number one, what does he do? Well, he focused on listening again, listening every day. He listened to English. Something else he does very interesting, he learned deeply. It means he took the same article, for example, or the same conversation. He listened to it 100, 200, 400, 500 times. Amazing. The same conversation. Why does he do that? I mean, it's so crazy. It's very different from what normal students do. Well, because he realized he needed that much is repetition, so that he could really learn and observe all the stars of English, the patterns of English. He realized that deep learning was more important than going fast and tried to learn a lot of words and a lot of grammar. No, you don't need to do quite so much like Jerry died. 500 times with one thing is a little bit much. It's kind of hard to stay motivated. It can become quite boring, but the general principle is important. Deep learning is something that all my superstar students do. That's a superstar learners do. They learn to learn very deeply first, so they go deep, a lot of repetitions, and then later they add more. Another guy who does a lot of deep learning. One of my favorite examples in my mini stories, Tiger Woods. We've heard a lot about Tiger Woods. Well, think about Tiger Woods for a minute. Tiger Woods started to practice golf when he was a child. His father taught him golf and he learned how to press. He could practice putting right the little short strokes. And he practiced big, long strokes. Driving in golf is called driving. It means hitting it far. The stance swing. Tiger Woods has been practicing the exact stance swing for years, since he was a small child until now. He's a master. He master, but he still practices his screen. This is super deep learning. He's doing the same simple thing again and again and again. It's time trying to make a tiny little improvement, right? Tiger didn't decide, oh, well, I see all this. I already know this. I don't need to practice anymore. That's what large English learners do. They say, I already know the past tense. I can take a test. I can practice. No problem. But when they speak, they make constant mistakes with the past tense. It's because they did not learn it deeply. They know it as a shallow level. They can take a test, but they don't know it deeply. The way Tiger Woods know his win because he's done it. I don't know, 50,000 times, 100 times, maybe more. So deep learning is something else we can learn from our role models. So what you need to do then is find role models, and you can guess them from a peer group. Peer group mean is people you associate with. The people you're around, the people you connect to every day. How did you find a peer group of super great English learners, of superstar students? Well, there are different ways to do it, but I think the easiest way to do it is online. The internet is emerging because you can communicate with people all over the world. So you can find super English learners in English in Europe, in South America, in Asia, all over, and you can come together as a group and communicate. Learn from each other, and that's going to increase the learning speed so much. That's one reason we call ourselves the Afro English Club. The club part is equally important to the lessons. The club part consists of rooms, and also a new member site we're developing as a purpose is to create a peer group, a group of superstar learners, so that you can connect with people in different parts of the world who are using these same patterns, these same methods, these same students, and you can learn from them, and so you can learn faster yourself. And another important thing about a peer group is it gives you support, emotional support. When you have other superstars to help you learn faster and you feel better. Sometimes maybe you feel tired, sometimes you have a problem. Well, you can go to these people, go to your peer group, tell them, help me, I feel tired. They will help you. They will encourage you. They will bring you energy back up. It's very important to do this. Doing something alone is much tougher than doing it with a positive superstars peer group. So you need to find a peer group, a powerful peer group of role models. People who are great English learners, you need to connect with them. Learn from them. Do what they are doing. If you do that, I promise you will be so much more successful than you have in the past. Okay, that is the end of this talk number 6. Models and peer group.